is the second time I've recorded this because I recorded it the first time and I actually sat and thought about this and thought I'd be more explicit and maybe give you a better example than I did on the first video. Okay, so I'm going to show you and then I'm going to tell you the write-up I did. So this is the way the app was at the end of the code along, right? So this is in public when you moved it over. And if you remember, right, if I go in here and look at the source code, right, in this case where, oh, it's the render. That's right. It's a render function. It's a render module. Hopefully getting used to that. You will. So the output here is based on the static array that I fed it. And so what happens is if you enter it multiple, right, if you enter multiple submissions, it doesn't matter. Actually, let's just go ahead and let it run through. Actually, sorry, it does matter in the sense that it just repeats this content, right? It just repeats the static content that I gave it. It's moving off of there, but it's up on the render. Again, it moved off of it, right? So it's repeating just this. So we know at this point it is not pulling. It's pulling from this TR, right? We're creating the row, the text array. Okay, and this is the loop, the for loop that we got introduced to. And this is the callback function that we created to iterate over that array. Okay, so what you want to attempt, right? Do your best, and I'll be actually more specific in a minute, but I just want to give you the difference. So when we ultimately get this finished, here's what it's going to look like, okay, is that when you enter data, okay, oh, I need to be specific about something I just realized, right? When you submit here, it actually is reflecting the data that the user's putting in, right? Okay, because in this case, right, and it's using that nice pattern of the CSS to display it. So that's where we're going to end up with, but I want you to, and I'll be specific here in a minute, about what parts are minimum you want to do, and I've also given you some ways to think about approaching this, okay? So over here, and I didn't even talk about this, but the first thing you're going to want to do is create a new module for the carbon footprint code, right? So the two functions that we have right now, you can leave the start function in there inside the main if you want. You could play around with that, but that should be pretty straightforward. I didn't run into anything there. So, you know, and there's a couple ways. You don't necessarily have to do this in this order, but I've kind of laid it out here. Like, so the first thing would be, like, see if how you could think about, and by the way, if you do, right, what you want is you want that heading only showing up once. So you have to start thinking about how this code is working. Right, because you're iterating over, in this case, the array, and so once the array ends, then it fills out the TD, right, the individual items for the buttons, and then it attaches it. So you have to think about, in this case, when you iterate over, right, you could fix just this, how you would do that. Hint is some of this, right, you could put up in here, but you'd have to really think about how you'd do that. I don't know if that's a good hint, actually, or not. But think about that, okay? So play around with that one, okay? So that's 10 points for that one. And then we're going to update the render, right? We're going to update the render module to output the user input, right? And here's my suggestions. There's, like, here's my approach, just FYI. So change the reference in the for each from the array, right, to the reference to the array of objects that's passed into the render table function. Now I'm actually not being explicit here because I want you to be able to read something like this and understand what that means. So find the for each and change that, okay? Now here, by the way, think about this. When you're iterating over, right, in this case, I'm not going to have you output all the key values. I'm only going to have you do first name, right? House members, house size, not the points, but also the total. Okay? So that's why we're demonstrating here. So you have to think about, because you could, and that's actually part of what I wrote in the write-up, is you could loop over the object. Yes, I mean inside, so this would be looping over the object inside the for each. Something we haven't done before, but is fairly easy to search for. So at this point, I'm kind of saying, hey, go out and try something we haven't seen. Give it your best shot, right? And then you would want to write some conditional logic to exclude. And I realized in doing this, I forgot to include last name, so I'll do that. So that's one approach, probably, and then I probably should have listed the second. This is actually the approach I'm going to show you next week. So if you take a stab at it this week, that would be fun. But if not, you can always create a TD for each of the values to be rendered into the page. Again, this, right, excluding, and again, I'll add the last name, right? I didn't do it here either. This is worth 40 points because it's the bulk of it. So give it a try. I'll definitely give you partial credit here for getting some of this done. And your output could look really funky, right? And then you will need to consider, right? So this is 10 points, because one of the ways, if you do, and this is where using your dev tools to really look at, right, how you're building up that TR, right? Because remember, inside the TR, and this is where, this is honestly when I show you how to look at dev tools so that you can really see this structure the way it's created, right? We create the DTs, and in that DT we have 2 buttons. Okay. But in doing this, trying to figure out how to go from the static array to the array of objects that we have, you have to not only, think about your approach, but also you'll have to think about how you append it. And I ended up doing an append child for doing it into the, when I did this one, I did append here because I ended up manually doing each one of these. And in doing that, I realized it's not the most efficient way, and it's a great time for us to level up our skills. But for this assignment, right, you don't have to do all of them, right, but you have to do the ones I've shown here, right? Name, in other words, these 4. Okay, so hopefully that helps clarify that, right? And like I said, for full points, right, have it rendering first name, right, first name and footprint if you want full points. But the more you work on this stuff in here, right, it really helps you start to understand how well we translated this concept of writing JavaScript to create DOM elements to then update the web page with. And there's nothing like a challenge to really see how well you're translating. Again, So hopefully you have a better idea about this. And I hope being more specific about how I grade each parts will help. Again, I just finished. I'm actually on the end of week 5 today, and and I get this too. There's many students, not many, there's probably about half of you, which is actually not too bad, that are waiting until the last minute to do especially this work at the end of the week. If I'd give you a suggestion, I would be to do the code alongs at the beginning of the week and leave this, do this after. That way you have enough time to really consider this. But I also get that life is what it is, and sometimes our schedules just don't allow for that. I'm just saying the more time, again, I'm going to sound like a teacher, the more time you do ahead, you're at work ahead, the more opportunities you're going to have to get help and talk about these concepts, right? And again, right, so my attempt at code before reviewing other students' code, right? So I really I tell you that because this is where the more you do see how well you're translating these concepts, the more when you get into a code review or you start doing your dev work starting in week 9, it will be more, it'll be, I don't know if I would say easier, but it won't be so frustrating. But even then you learn. In our frustration often, and this can be true of coding, and I guess I'll talk about this in week 8 that I'm going to start working on today. So part of coding, learning how to make things work, is there is a point of frustration often. I read some of it this week in your post. And I want you to know that's not the intent, but that sometimes is the outcome of this. Anyway, there you go. Hopefully this video, along with the instruction, I'll update that to exclude last name, house members, and house size points. Sorry, both of these are points on this one. All right, talk to you later.